At 6:43 in the morning, inside the busiest airport terminal in New York City, a police officer placed his hand on the shoulder of an older black man and made the worst mistake of his life. The officer thought he was stopping a nobody. He thought he was humiliating a man who would lower his eyes, obey quietly, miss his flight, and disappear into the crowd like so many others before him. But the man he shoved against the glass wall was Marcus Bennett, a justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. And before the sun went down over Manhattan, the video of that moment would be on every screen in America. A police captain would be begging for silence. Federal agents would be racing through airport traffic, and one officer would finally realize that the person he tried to break had spent his entire life standing where justice refuses to kneel. Before we continue, comment what time you're watching and where in the world you're from, and don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you simply cannot miss. The morning began with rain. Not a violent rain. Not the kind that slams against windows and makes people look up. It was a cold, steady New York rain, the kind that paints every taxi windshield silver and turns the city into a blur of headlights, umbrellas, brake lights, and tired faces. At 5:58 in the morning, Marcus Bennett stepped out of a black town car in front of Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport. The driver hurried around with an umbrella. Marcus raised one hand gently. "No need, David. I have it." David Carter, his longtime driver, hesitated. He was a careful man in his late 50s with kind eyes and a habit of worrying more than he admitted. "Justice Bennett, are you sure you do not want me to walk in with you?" Marcus smiled faintly. "It is an airport, David, not a battlefield." David did not laugh. "These days, sir, sometimes it is hard to tell the difference." Marcus looked through the rain toward the bright glass entrance of the terminal. Inside, travelers moved like shadows behind the doors, rolling bags, coffee cups, winter coats, children half asleep on their parents' shoulders. He understood what David meant. The world had become loud, angry, suspicious. Everyone seemed to be carrying a private match in a room full of gasoline. But Marcus Bennett had lived long enough to know that fear could not be allowed to make every decision. He buttoned his charcoal overcoat, picked up his worn brown leather briefcase, and gave David a nod. "I will call you when I land in Washington." David still looked uneasy. "Your security detail should have been with you." Marcus paused. "I know. Then why did you tell them not to come? Because the law should not require an army to walk through a public airport." David lowered his eyes. "Yes, sir." Marcus stepped through the rain and entered the terminal at 6:02. He was 62 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and built with the quiet strength of a man who had learned early in life that dignity had to be carried from the inside out. His skin was deep mahogany. His hair was short, silver at the temples. His beard was neatly trimmed, gray along the jawline. His eyes were dark, steady, and difficult to read unless you knew him well. Most people saw seriousness. Those who knew him saw grief, discipline, and compassion living in the same room. Marcus Bennett was not a celebrity judge. He did not enjoy the cameras. He did not give dramatic interviews or chase applause. He had spent most of his life inside courtrooms, classrooms, and quiet offices filled with case files. Before the Supreme Court, he had been a civil rights attorney in Atlanta, a federal judge in Chicago, and a constitutional law professor in Washington. His opinions were studied in law schools from New York to California. His dissents had been quoted by senators. His majority opinions had changed lives for people who would never know his name. But that morning, walking into Terminal 4 with a briefcase and a boarding pass, he looked like an older black man traveling alone. And that was all Officer Eric Lawson chose to see. At 6:10, Marcus passed the airline counter without stopping. He had checked in the night before. His flight to Washington was scheduled to depart at 7:35. The boarding time was 7:05. If everything went smoothly, he would land before 9, arrive at the Supreme Court before 10, and join an emergency session involving voting access in several states. The case mattered deeply. A late order from a lower court had thrown thousands of ballots into uncertainty. The Supreme Court had called a rare expedited hearing. Marcus had spent most of the night reviewing briefs. He had slept less than 3 hours, but his mind was clear. Inside his briefcase were printed notes, sealed court documents, his federal identification, his Supreme Court credentials, and a small photograph of his late wife, Elaine. The photograph was old. In it, Elaine stood beside him on the steps of the Supreme Court, laughing because the wind had nearly stolen her scarf. Marcus kept that picture tucked inside a pocket of the briefcase. Not because he was sentimental in public, he was not. But because in difficult moments when the world felt colder than it should, he liked to remember the sound of her laugh. Elaine had been gone for 4 years. Cancer had taken her slowly. Marcus still wore his wedding ring. At 6:18, he bought black coffee from a small kiosk near the security entrance. The young cashier recognized him only after handing him the cup. "Wait, are you?" Marcus raised a finger gently to his lips. She smiled, embarrassed. "Sorry, sir. No harm done. Have a safe flight." "Thank you." At 6:25, Marcus approached the premium security area. It was separated from the main line by silver stanchions and dark blue ropes. A small sign directed verified travelers to the front. The regular line stretched far to the left, filled with passengers shifting their weight, checking phones, and glancing anxiously at the time. The premium lane was moving smoothly. A white businessman in a gray coat stepped through after a quick scan. A family of 4 followed. An older couple moved slowly, and the agent waited patiently. No one raised a voice. No one touched anyone. No one was asked to explain why they belonged. At the document podium stood Rachel Adams, a transportation security supervisor in her early 30s. She had curly brown hair pulled into a bun and tired but alert eyes. She had been working since 4 in the morning. She had already dealt with lost passports, angry travelers, a medical emergency near Gate 20, and a child who had cried for 30 straight minutes because his stuffed bear had to go through the scanner. When Marcus approached, Rachel looked down at his boarding pass and identification case. Her posture changed at once. "Good morning, sir," she said with sudden care. "Good morning." He was about to scan the card when a voice cut across the lane. "Hold on." The voice belonged to Officer Eric Lawson. At 6:27, Lawson stepped away from the metal post where he had been standing with his arms folded. He was 43 years old, pale-skinned, stocky, with sandy hair cut close and a jaw that seemed clenched even when he was silent. His uniform was pressed. His badge was polished. His boots were spotless. He carried himself like a man who believed the badge did not simply give him authority, but made him the owner of every space he entered. Among some co-workers, Lawson was called the Filter. Not officially, never in paperwork, but quietly, behind doors and in break rooms, that was the name. He liked deciding who looked right for certain lines, certain lounges, certain seats, certain doors. He had a talent for turning suspicion into procedure. He knew how to use phrases like random screening and officer discretion and behavioral concern. He knew how to write reports that made humiliation sound like policy, and he had survived complaint after complaint because the people he targeted were usually too tired, too afraid, too late for their flights, or too powerless to fight back. Lawson stepped between Marcus and the podium. "This line is for verified travelers only." Marcus looked at him. His expression remained calm. "Regular screening is over there." Lawson pointed toward the long line with 2 fingers. Marcus did not follow the gesture. "My identification is on the podium." The supervisor was about to verify it. Lawson did not look at the identification. "I am telling you where to go." The first small silence formed. Rachel Adams stood behind the podium, hands hovering near the scanner. "Sir," she said carefully, "his credential appears to be." Lawson turned his head sharply. "I did not ask you." Rachel stopped speaking. Marcus noticed that. He noticed everything. He noticed Lawson had not read the credential. He noticed the travelers behind him had become still. He noticed the small black security camera above the lane angled directly toward them. He noticed Officer Mark Reynolds standing near the second lane, watching but not moving. Marcus spoke softly. "Officer, I am a verified traveler. I am also carrying federal court documents. Please allow Supervisor Adams to complete the verification." Lawson's eyes narrowed. "Federal court documents?" "Yes." Lawson gave a short laugh. "That is a new one." Marcus opened his credential wallet and held it out. "My name is Marcus Bennett. I serve as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States." Rachel's eyes widened. A man behind Marcus whispered, "Oh my God." Lawson looked at the credential for less than 1 second. Then he looked back at Marcus. This could be fake. The words landed with force. Marcus did not blink. "You can verify it by scanning the card or calling the number printed on the back." "Do not tell me how to do my job. I am asking you to do it." That was the moment Lawson pride took control of the morning. Not fear, not policy. Pride. The kind of pride that cannot survive being questioned by someone it has already decided to disrespect. Lawson stepped closer. "Step out of line. On what grounds?" "I said step out of line." Marcus looked at Rachel. She looked frightened now. He looked at Mark Reynolds. Mark looked away. At 6:29, Marcus made the first decision that would later matter in court. He complied. He picked up his briefcase and stepped out of the premium lane into the small inspection area beside the glass wall. He spoke clearly, not loudly, but clearly enough for nearby travelers and microphones to hear. "I am complying with your instruction." Lawson followed. "Put the briefcase down." Marcus placed it on the floor beside his right foot, hands on the wall. Marcus turned his head slightly. "Please state the basis for the search." Hands on the wall. "I have not refused. I am asking for the legal basis." Lawson's hand moved to his belt. Marcus saw it. So did everyone else. At 6:30, a woman in a beige coat near the rope barrier began recording on her phone. Lawson saw the phone. He smiled in a way that made several passengers uncomfortable. "You want to make this difficult?" Marcus' voice remained even. "No, I want this done lawfully." Lawson leaned in. "People like you always have something to say." The woman recording gasped. Marcus' eyes hardened for the first time. "People like me." Lawson realized the phrase had slipped out. His jaw tightened. "People who think they are special." Marcus slowly removed his glasses, cleaned one lens with a cloth from his pocket, and put them back on. Officer, I am requesting your badge number and the name of your supervisor. Lawson stared at him. What did you say? Your badge number and supervisor. Lawson lifted his radio. At 6:31, his voice went out over the police channel. Need backup at premium security. Non-compliant mail. Possible fraudulent federal documents. Refusing lawful orders. Marcus turned slightly toward the nearest camera. That statement is false. I have complied with every order to step aside. I have presented valid federal identification. The officer has refused to verify it. Lawson lunged forward and grabbed Marcus' upper arm. Hard. The crowd reacted at once. Rachel said, Officer Lawson. Lawson barked, stay back. Marcus looked down at the hand gripping his arm. Remove your hand, you are being detained. For what offense? Disorderly conduct. Marcus' voice sharpened. Asking for your badge number is not disorderly conduct. Lawson twisted his arm. Marcus exhaled through his teeth. Behind them, Mark Reynolds finally stepped forward. Eric, maybe we should get Captain Cooper before Lawson turned on him. Did I ask for your opinion? Mark stopped. Marcus looked at Mark, and in that quick glance, Mark saw something he would remember later. Not fear, not anger, disappointment. At 6:32, Lawson shoved Marcus toward the glass wall. Marcus stumbled one step, catching himself with his left hand. His briefcase fell. The brass latch struck the tile and snapped open. Papers slid across the floor. A sealed court folder, a printed memorandum, a small notebook, a pen, then the photograph of Elaine. It drifted out softly, face up, landing near the toe of Lawson's boot. Marcus saw it immediately. His face changed. Not much, just enough. Please do not step on that photograph. Lawson looked down. Then he looked back at Marcus. Hands on the wall, a young woman from Dallas, standing 3 feet away with a phone in her hand, bent slightly as if to pick it up. Lawson shouted, do not touch anything. She froze. Marcus placed both palms against the wall. At 6:33, Lawson pulled one of Marcus' wrists behind his back. Marcus spoke again. You are twisting my shoulder. Stop resisting. I am not resisting. Lawson pulled harder. Marcus' body stiffened. The pain shot from his shoulder into his chest. Mark Reynolds' voice rose. Eric, he is not resisting. Lawson ignored him. The first cuff closed around Marcus' wrist. The sound was small, metallic, final. Several passengers were now filming. One man shouted, he told you he is a judge. Another voice said, he said Supreme Court. Lawson turned his head and yelled, anyone interfering with police action will be arrested. At 6:34, Lawson forced Marcus' second hand behind his back and locked the cuffs. Marcus winced. My shoulder is injured. Lawson pressed him harder against the glass. Should have complied faster. Marcus looked over his shoulder. Officer Lawson, I am going to say this once more. I am Marcus Bennett, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. You have my credentials on the podium. You are detaining me unlawfully. Lawson laughed. Then he said the words that would end his career. You people always think a title makes you untouchable. The sentence was captured by 3 airport cameras, 2 traveler phones, and Rachel Adams' body microphone. Rachel whispered, oh, no. Lawson grabbed Marcus by the back of the coat and pulled him away from the wall. Where are you taking him? Mark asked. Secondary holding.
For what? For questioning.
Marcus tried to turn carefully. My briefcase contains sealed court documents. They cannot be left on the floor. Lawson shoved him toward the metal inspection table. At 6:35, Marcus' shoulder struck the edge of the table. The pain was so sharp he nearly lost balance. Lawson pushed him down. Marcus' chest hit the metal surface. His glasses slid off and fell. One lens shattered. The sound made the crowd gasp. Lawson planted his knee into Marcus' lower back. Marcus' breath left his body. I cannot breathe properly in this position. Lawson leaned over him, then stopped talking. Blood began to run from a cut near Marcus' brow where the table edge had caught him. It moved slowly at first, a thin line down his temple. Rachel Adams stepped around the podium. He is bleeding. Lawson shouted, back up. Rachel did not back up. He needs medical attention. Lawson pointed at her. You want to lose your job today. Rachel stopped again, but this time she did not lower her eyes. At 6:36, Thomas Reed entered the story. He was 64, a retired federal prosecutor from Chicago, traveling to Los Angeles for his granddaughter's birthday. He had gray hair, a black overcoat, and the tired posture of a man who had seen too many people lie under oath. He pushed through the crowd. Officer, remove your knee from that man's back. Lawson looked up. Step away. Thomas held his phone in one hand. That man is cuffed. He is injured. He has not resisted. You are using excessive force in full view of witnesses. Lawson's face reddened. Step away or you are going in cuffs too. Thomas did not move. I spent 30 years prosecuting misconduct cases. I know exactly what I am looking at. Lawson pointed at Mark Reynolds. Arrest him. Mark did not move. Eric, no. Lawson stared at him.
You say.
Mark swallowed. I said no. The crowd grew louder. Rachel Adams reached for her radio. At 6:37, she called airport medical. Medical assistance needed at premium security. Adult male injured, bleeding from the head. Possible shoulder injury. Lawson snapped, cancel that. Rachel looked him straight in the face. No, that was the second crack. At 6:38, Airport Security Director Laura Hayes received the call in her office 2 levels above the terminal. The words "adult male injured" and "premium security" made her stand immediately. She grabbed her radio and headed for the elevator. At 6:39, Captain Daniel Cooper, Lawson's supervisor, was notified. Cooper was 51, heavyset with silver blonde hair and the careful voice of a man who had spent years surviving by managing appearances. He was not as openly cruel as Lawson. He was something more dangerous in institutions. He was comfortable. Comfortable signing complaint dismissals, comfortable office explanation, comfortable telling victims there was insufficient evidence, comfortable protecting the department from embarrassment. When the call came, he frowned at the dispatcher. "Who is involved?" "Officer Lawson." Cooper closed his eyes briefly. Then he walked faster. At 6:40, Marcus was still face down on the metal table. His hands were cuffed behind him. His shoulder burned. Blood reached his cheek, but his voice, though strained, remained clear. "I need medical attention. I am not resisting. I am asking all witnesses to preserve your recordings." Lawson leaned close to his ear. "Nobody cares about your little speech." Marcus turned his head just enough to look at him. "You will." Lawson blinked. For the first time, a shadow crossed his face. Not guilt, recognition that this might not be going the way he expected. At 6:41, Laura Hayes arrived. She saw the scene and stopped cold. The documents on the floor, the broken glasses, the blood, the knee, the phones. Then she saw the credential case still sitting on Rachel's podium. Rachel pointed to it with a shaking hand. "Director Hayes, you need to look at that." Laura opened the credential. Her face went pale. She looked at Marcus, then back at the credential. Then at Lawson. "Officer Lawson, remove your knee and take off those handcuffs immediately." Lawson scoffed. "He is detained for." Laura cut him off. "Immediately." Lawson hesitated. That hesitation would later be listed in the federal complaint as another act of unlawful detention. At 6:42, Captain Cooper arrived. He came in already irritated. "What is going on here?" Lawson stood, but kept one hand on Marcus' shoulder. "Fraudulent. ID. Non-compliant. Possible threat. I had to use force." Laura Hayes stepped toward Cooper and handed him the credential. "Captain, read it." Cooper looked down. For a moment his face showed only annoyance. Then his eyes moved across the words. "Marcus Elijah Bennett, Associate Justice, Supreme Court of the United States." The color drained from his face. At 6:43 the whole story changed. Cooper looked at Lawson and whispered, "What did you do?" Lawson frowned. "Captain," he refused. "Take the cuffs off. Captain, take them off right now." Lawson fumbled with the key. His hands were not steady. Marcus slowly sat upright after the cuffs came off. His right arm trembled. He reached for the edge of the table with his left hand. Rachel handed him folded gauze from an emergency kit. He pressed it to his brow. The terminal had become almost silent. The only sounds were distant announcements, the rain against the glass, and the clicking of phone cameras. Cooper stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Justice Bennett, we need to get you somewhere private." Marcus looked at him. "Private for medical care, sir." "And to discuss what happened." Marcus wiped blood from his temple. "We can discuss it here." Cooper swallowed. "Sir, with respect, this is a sensitive matter." Marcus looked toward the travelers. "A man was injured in public. The matter became public when your officer put his knee on my back." Cooper leaned closer. "Justice Bennett, I promise you we will handle this internally." Marcus' face changed. Not anger, something colder. "Captain Cooper, I have read more internal reviews than you have written incident reports. Do not insult me with the language of containment." Cooper went still. Marcus continued. "No witness phone will be touched. No footage will be deleted. No report will be written before federal authorities are notified. My documents will be collected in the presence of witnesses. And I want medical care now." Laura Hayes nodded quickly. "Medical is on the way." Cooper looked around and realized too late that at least 15 phones were still recording. At 6:46, paramedics reached the security lane. Grace Miller, the lead paramedic, knelt in front of Marcus. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" "Marcus Bennett. Do you know where you are?" "John F. Kennedy International Airport." "Do you know the time?" "Approximately 6:47. Grace glanced at the blood and then at his shoulder. "You are very calm for someone who just went through that." Marcus gave a tired breath that almost became a laugh. "Calm is not the same as unhurt." She nodded. That line, too, would later be quoted everywhere. Calm is not the same as unhurt. At 6:50, Marcus asked for the photograph of Elaine. The young woman from Dallas stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Sir, I picked it up when he moved away." She handed it to him carefully. Marcus took it with his left hand. "Thank you." The young woman whispered, "I am so sorry." Marcus looked at the photograph. "So am I." At 6:52, Captain Cooper attempted the first cover-up. He told 2 officers to create a perimeter and identify all witnesses. Thomas Reed heard him and stepped in. "Identify witnesses for what purpose?" Cooper forced a polite expression. "For our internal investigation." Thomas lifted his phone. "Then you will give every witness a written preservation notice and tell them not to delete their recordings." Cooper stared. Thomas continued. "What you will not do is intimidate them, separate them, or demand their phones without a warrant." Cooper's jaw tightened. "Sir, you are interfering." Thomas smiled without warmth. "No, Captain." At 6:55, Marcus called his daughter Nia Bennett. She answered from Atlanta, where she was preparing for court. "Dad, Michelle." The sound of his voice made her pause. "What happened?" "There has been an incident at JFK. I am safe enough to call you, but I need you to listen carefully." "Safe enough? What does that mean?" "I was detained and injured by an airport police officer." For 3 seconds, there was no sound. Then Michelle's voice changed. "Injured how?" "Cut above the brow. Shoulder injury." "Cuffed." "Cuffed, yes." Michelle inhaled sharply. "Who was there with you?" "Paramedics. Airport security. Witnesses. Did they know who you were?" "They were told." "And after they knew," Marcus looked at Cooper, "they became very interested in privacy." Michelle's voice turned cold. "Do not go anywhere alone with them." "I will not. I am getting on the first flight to New York. You have court." "Not anymore." At 7:02, the first short video appeared online. It was only 27 seconds. It showed Marcus face down on the metal table, Lawson, knee on his back, blood visible near his brow, and Marcus saying, "I need medical attention. I am not resisting." By 7:12, the clip had been shared thousands of times. By 7:20, a longer clip appeared. It included Lawson saying, "You people always think a title makes you untouchable." By 7:30, reporters were calling the airport press office. By 7:40, the Supreme Court Marshal Office contacted federal law enforcement. At 7:45, 2 FBI agents from the New York field office were dispatched to Cave. Special Agent Helen Brooks and Special Agent James Miller were both experienced civil rights investigators. They had handled police misconduct cases before. But when the call came through that the injured victim was a sitting Supreme Court justice, neither of them spoke for a full moment. Then Agent Brooks said, "Secure everything." Agent Miller replied, "They will try not to." At 8:11, federal agents arrived at Terminal 4. Marcus had refused transport to the hospital until the footage was preserved and his sealed documents were collected properly. Grace Miller argued with him twice. He apologized both times and still did not leave. Agent Brooks walked toward him with her badge visible. "Justice Bennett, I am Special Agent Helen Brooks. This is Special Agent James Miller. We are here to preserve evidence and take jurisdiction over potential federal civil rights violations." Marcus. "Thank you, Agent Brooks." She looked at his injury. "You need medical care." "With respect, sir." "Listen to them." Marcus almost smiled. "Federal agents have become very direct since I was last in trial court." Agent Brooks did not smile back. "So have cover-ups." Marcus looked at her then. She understood. At 8:17, Agent Miller requested all security footage from 6:15 onward, covering the premium security lane, adjacent hallway, secondary inspection area, and officer approach path. At 8:24, Captain Cooper tried to narrow the request. "Agent Miller, surely you only need the incident itself." Agent Miller turned. "Captain, the incident began before the force. I want the approach, the interaction, the aftermath, and any officer communications from the moment Justice Bennett entered the terminal." Cooper's face tightened. "That is a broad request." Agent Brooks stepped in. "It is a federal request." Cooper said nothing. At 8:40, Marcus agreed to leave for the hospital. Before he was placed in the ambulance, he stood slowly, supported by Grace Miller. Travelers had gathered behind the perimeter. Some had missed flights. Some had chosen to stay. Some simply could not walk away from what they had witnessed. Marcus looked at them. His voice was tired but strong enough to carry. "Thank you for not looking away." No one spoke. Then the young woman from Dallas began to cry again. At 9:25, Marcus arrived at New York Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan. At 9:40, doctors confirmed that his shoulder had been partially dislocated. The cut above his eyebrow required 5 stitches. His wrists were bruised. His lower back showed swelling from the pressure of Lawson's knee. At 10:10, Nia Bennett landed in New York. At 10:48, she walked into her father's hospital room, still wearing her Navy courtroom suit. Her hair pulled back, her eyes full of fear, disguised as anger. When she saw the stitches, the sling, the bruises, she stopped at the doorway. "Dad." Marcus looked up. "Hello, sweetheart." That broke her. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him carefully, shaking with rage and relief. "I told you to take the security detail." He closed his eyes. "Yes, you did. I hate being right like this, I know." She pulled back and looked at him. "We are going after all of them." Marcus looked at the rain streaking the hospital window. "Not because they hurt me." Michelle's eyes flashed. "That is enough." "No," Marcus said softly. "Because they have been hurting people for years." At 11:30, the Supreme Court announced that the emergency hearing would be postponed due to a medical incident involving Justice Bennett. That statement lasted less than 20 minutes before the video made the truth impossible to soften. At noon, every major news network in the country was running the footage. New York, Washington, Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, Houston, Philadelphia. The same images played again and again. Marcus against the wall. Marcus on the table. Lawson knee on his back. Rachel Adams calling for medical help. Thomas Reed demanding that the officer stop. And Cooper trying to move Marcus somewhere private. By 1:15, the president had been briefed. By 2 o'clock, the Attorney General publicly confirmed a federal civil rights investigation. By 3:30, Officer Eric Lawson was placed on administrative leave. By 4, the Port Authority Police Department issued a statement saying the incident was under review and that the department took all allegations seriously. By 4:20, Rachel Adams leaked one sentence to a reporter through her attorney. They did not take him seriously until they saw the title. That sentence exploded. By evening, the story was no longer only about Marcus Bennett. It was about every person who had been told to calm down while being mistreated. Every person who had been asked why they were in a place they had every right to enter. Every person who had been searched, delayed, mocked, or threatened, then told there was no evidence. Now there was evidence. Too much to deny. The first internal lie collapsed the next morning. Lawson report claimed Marcus had refused to show identification. The video showed Marcus presenting 2 forms of federal identification before being touched. The report claimed Marcus had raised his voice and agitated nearby passengers. Audio showed Marcus speaking calmly while Lawson escalated. The report claimed Marcus pulled away. Video showed Marcus standing still until Lawson twisted his arm. The report claimed Lawson had not used racially suggestive language. Audio captured the words, "people like you and you people." The report claimed Captain Cooper was notified only after force had already been used. Radio logs showed Cooper had been alerted earlier about a conflict involving Lawson, a traveler with federal credentials. That detail mattered, because Cooper had not rushed to prevent harm. He had arrived to manage damage. The deeper investigation began at once. Federal agents interviewed Rachel Adams for 4 hours. She cried twice, not because she was weak, because she had carried years of fear in her throat. She told them Lawson had a pattern. He targeted black travelers in suits, black pilots, black business owners, black women traveling alone, Latino families with upgraded tickets, Muslim passengers with religious clothing. He always had a reason. Suspicious document. Random. Check. Verification issue. He almost never did it to white travelers who looked angry, rushed, or wealthy. When Agent Brooks asked why she had not reported it sooner, Rachel stared at her hands. "I did. What happened?" "Nothing." "Who did you report to?" "Captain Cooper." Agent Brooks stopped moving. More witnesses came forward. A cardiologist from Boston said Lawson detained him so long. He missed a medical conference where he was scheduled to speak. A school principal from Atlanta said Lawson accused her of using someone else's boarding pass while white colleagues passed beside her. A retired Army colonel from Chicago said Lawson made him remove his belt, jacket, shoes, and medals from a garment bag while joking that everyone wants to be a hero now. A young software engineer from San Francisco said Lawson told him first class was not a costume party. A grandmother from Houston said she had been pulled aside in front of her grandchildren and searched while they cried. The stories were different. The pattern was the same. Humiliation disguised as caution, prejudice disguised as procedure, power disguised as safety. Then came the locker room photographs. A former officer named Brian Mitchell had resigned 2 years earlier after filing complaints that went nowhere. When he saw the video of Marcus, he contacted the FBI and provided old photos from inside the precinct. One photo showed a whiteboard with tally marks under officer names. Another showed the words premium catches. A third showed Lawson name at the top. Agent Miller stared at the images for a long time. This was a game. Brian Mitchell nodded. They treated people like points. Did Captain Cooper know? Brian gave a bitter laugh. Captain Cooper erased the board the day inspectors came through. The next evidence came from Lawson phone. Messages, memes, photos of travelers, jokes about sending people back to coach, complaints about diversity travelers. One message from Lawson to 2 other officers read, "Premium Lane looks like a bus station today." Another read, "Watch me clean it up." The worst message came at 6:24 the morning Marcus was assaulted. Lawson had sent a photo of Marcus approaching the lane. Under it, he wrote, This one thinks he is Washington important." 3 minutes later, he stepped into Marcus' path. The timeline was now undeniable. He had targeted Marcus before Marcus said a word. At the hospital, Michelle read the message aloud to her father. "This one thinks he is Washington important." Marcus sat quietly. Michelle lowered the paper. "Dad." He looked at the window. "He did not know who I was, but he knew what he wanted me to be. A problem." "Yes." 3 weeks later, a federal grand jury convened in Manhattan. The indictments came down on a Thursday morning. Officer Eric Lawson was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, assault resulting in bodily injury, obstruction of justice, falsifying an official report, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and witness intimidation. Captain Daniel Cooper was charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, destruction of evidence, and failure to intervene. Authors Peter Grant and William Harris were charged with conspiracy and evidence tampering, after investigators found they had attempted to delete locker room images and group chat messages. Mark Reynolds was not charged after agreeing to testify truthfully. Rachel Adams became a protected witness. Laura Hayes cooperated fully. The city tried to contain the story. It failed. The trial began 4 months later in federal court in Manhattan every morning. The sidewalks outside the courthouse filled before sunrise. News vans lined the street. Protesters stood behind barricades. Some signs said "Justice for Marcus." Others said "Believe the unseen victims." One sign, held by an older woman from Atlanta, said if it took a Supreme Court justice for you to see it, you were not blind. You were comfortable. Marcus saw that sign on the first day. He stood still for several seconds. Michelle touched his arm. "Dad." He nodded. "She is right." Inside the courtroom, Lawson looked different without the uniform, smaller. Not physically, perhaps, but spiritually. The uniform had once widened him. The badge had once made his voice heavier. Now he sat in a navy suit, clean-shaven, hands folded, eyes avoiding the front row where Marcus sat with Michelle. Captain Cooper sat at the second defense table. His face was pale. He understood institutions better than Lawson did. He understood that when systems fall, they often sacrifice the people who thought the system would protect them forever. The prosecution opened with time, not emotion. Time. Karen Whitfield, the lead federal prosecutor, stood before the jury and built the morning minute by minute. At 6:25, Justice Marcus Bennett entered the premium security lane. At 6:27, Officer Lawson approached him. At 6:28, Justice Bennett presented credentials. At 6:29, Officer Lawson ordered him out of line without verification. At 6:31, Officer Lawson falsely radioed that he had a non-compliant male. At 6:32, he placed hands on Justice Bennett. At 6:34, he handcuffed him. At 6:35, he forced him onto a metal table. At 6:36, he kept his knee on the back of an injured, restrained man. At 6:41, his own supervisors learned the man was a Supreme Court justice. At 6:43, they removed the cuffs, not because the force was wrong, but because the title made them afraid. Then she turned to the jury. The law does not become law only when the victim is famous. It was law at 6:27. It was law at 6:32. It was law before anyone in that terminal knew his name. Then she played the video. The courtroom watched everything. No cuts, no commentary, no music, no dramatic zooms, just reality. Marcus standing, Lawson stepping in, credentials presented, Lawson refusing to look, the shove, the cuff, the table, the blood, the knee, the photograph of Elaine falling onto the floor. When Marcus said, "Please do not step on that photograph," one juror wiped his eyes. The defense attorney tried to argue pressure. "Airports are dangerous places," he said. "Officers must make quick judgments." Karen Whitfield answered with one sentence. "Quick judgment is not permission for blind prejudice." Rachel Adams testified first. She wore a black blazer and kept both hands folded tightly in front of her. She described the lane, the credential, the refusal to verify. The moment Lawson grabbed Marcus, the prosecutor asked, "Did Justice Bennett threaten Officer Lawson?" "No." "Did he raise his voice?" "No." "Did he refuse to step aside?"
No.
"Did Officer Lawson scan the credential?" "No." "Did Officer Lawson call a supervisor before touching him?" "No." "What did you believe was happening?" Rachel looked toward the jury. "I believed Officer Lawson had decided Justice Bennett did not belong before he knew who he was." The defense tried to shake her. "Were you afraid of losing your job if you did not support Justice Bennett?" Rachel looked at the attorney. "I was afraid of losing my job when I called medical. I did it anyway because he was bleeding." Thomas Reed testified next. He spoke plainly. He told the court he had seen excessive force before. He said Marcus was compliant. He said Lawson behavior was punitive, not protective. The defense asked, "Are you anti-police?" Thomas leaned toward the microphone. "My brother served honorably in Chicago for 27 years. I am not anti-police. I am anti-abuse. Good officers should be too." Then came Mark Reynolds. His testimony changed the trial. He looked nervous as he took the stand. He avoided Lawson's eyes. His voice trembled when he gave his name. Karen Whitfield asked him about the culture inside the unit. Mark breathed in slowly. "Officer Lawson targeted minority travelers. Most of us knew it. Did Captain Cooper know it?" "Yes." "Did you report it?" "No." "Why not?" Mark's eyes filled with shame. "Because I wanted to keep my life simple." The courtroom was silent. He continued. "I told myself Lawson was just rough. I told myself if people had nothing to hide, they would be fine. I told myself it was not my responsibility. But that morning, when I saw Justice Bennett face down and bleeding, I understood that my silence was not neutral. It was permission." Marcus looked at him. Mark turned toward Marcus from the stand. "Justice Bennett?" "I am sorry," the defense objected. The judge told the jury to disregard the direct apology, but nobody forgot. Then the prosecution showed the group chat messages. The courtroom saw the words, "Premium Lane looks like a bus station today. Watch me clean it up. This one thinks he is Washington important." Lawson stared at the table. Captain Cooper closed his eyes. The defense case lasted only 3 days. Lawson made the decision to testify. His attorney begged him not to, but Lawson wanted control again. On direct examination, he claimed he was following training. He said Marcus' body language seemed confrontational. He said federal credentials could be faked. He said the airport environment required caution. He said he regretted that Marcus was injured, but he did not intend harm. Then Karen Whitfield stood for cross-examination. Officer Lawson, when did you first see Justice Bennett that morning? Around 6:24 before he reached the podium. Yes, you took a photograph of him. I do not remember. She displayed the photo. Does this refresh your memory? Lawson swallowed. Yes, you sent it to a group chat. Yes, you wrote, "This one thinks he is Washington important." It was a joke. You had not spoken to him yet. No, he had not presented credentials yet. No, he had not refused an order. No, so before any interaction, you had already decided he was someone to mock. Lawson shifted. That is not what I said. Karen stepped closer. When he gave you his Supreme Court credential, did you scan it? No. Did you call the verification number? No. Did you ask Supervisor Adams to verify it? No. Did you contact the Supreme Court police? No. Did you contact the Federal Liaison Desk?
No.
So, when you told dispatch possible fraudulent federal documents, you had done nothing to determine whether they were fraudulent. Lawson said nothing. Karen waited. Answer the question? No. Karen changed the screen. The video played again. Marcus' voice came through the speakers. I am complying with your instruction. Karen paused it. Does that sound non-compliant to you? Lawson's jaw tightened. He was using legal language. The courtroom stirred. Karen looked at him. Legal language. He was trying to control the situation by stating what he was doing, by challenging me, by asking for your badge number, by refusing to just follow simple instructions. Karen let the answer hang. Then she asked quietly, Officer Marcus Bennett had been a white man in the same suit, carrying the same briefcase. Would you have stopped him? Objection. The judge paused, overruled. Lawson stared ahead. I do not know. Karen leaned in. You do not know.
No.
She nodded. That is the most honest answer you have given today. The jury heard it. Marcus heard it. And for the first time, Lawson looked truly afraid, not of prison, of himself. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. The verdict came back just after 5 in the evening. Guilty, 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 guilty. Lawson stared forward as each count was read. Captain Cooper lowered his head into his hands. Michelle gripped her father's arm. Marcus did not celebrate. He simply closed his eyes. Sometimes justice does not feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like a door opening in a room where too many people have been unable to breathe. Sentencing took place 6 weeks later. The courtroom was packed again. Before the judge pronounced sentence, Marcus was allowed to speak. He stood slowly. His shoulder had healed, but not completely. Some mornings it still stiffened when rain came. The scar near his brow had faded into a thin line. He looked at Lawson. Officer Lawson, I have listened to your attorneys describe your service, your stress, your fear, and your mistakes. I have listened carefully because listening is part of justice. But I want to speak now about the people who were not listened to. He turned slightly toward the gallery. The surgeon who missed his conference. The teacher humiliated in front of her students. The grandmother searched while her grandchildren cried. The father treated like a threat because he asked why. The travelers who filed complaints and received silence in return. I stand here with a title, but they stood alone. Lawson's eyes lowered. Marcus continued. What you did to me was wrong before you knew my name. It was wrong before you saw my credential. It was wrong before the cameras made it impossible to deny. My position did not create my dignity. It only made the violation harder for your department to bury. The courtroom was still. You saw my skin before you saw my humanity. You saw my confidence and called it defiance. You heard my question and called it disorder. You felt your authority challenged because I asked you to obey the law you swore to enforce. Marcus' voice softened. But I do not stand here to say you are beyond redemption. I stand here to say redemption begins where excuses end. If prison teaches you only that you were caught, then nothing has changed. If it teaches you that power without humility becomes cruelty, then perhaps something can still be saved. Lawson's eyes filled for the first time. Marcus sat down. The judge sentenced Eric Lawson to 9 years in federal prison. Captain Daniel Cooper received 5 years. Peter Grant and William Harris received 3 years each. Mark Reynolds lost his job, but was not imprisoned because of his cooperation. Rachel Adams was promoted months later after federal monitors praised her courage. The civil case that followed revealed even more. More than 900 complaints over 12 years, most involving minority travelers, nearly none properly investigated, files closed without interviews, videos never requested, witnesses never contacted, supervisors copying and pasting the same phrases, insufficient evidence. Officer acted with indiscretion. Passenger became agitated, unable to substantiate. The jury saw the pattern. They awarded Marcus a historic judgment, but Marcus had already announced what he would do. Every dollar not needed for medical costs and legal expenses would go into the Bennett Equal Justice Fund. The fund opened its offices in New York, Washington, Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Houston. Its mission was simple: represent the people who had no camera, no title, and no powerful friend to call. Within the first year, the fund took more than 300 cases. Airport misconduct, workplace discrimination, unlawful stops, retaliation, false reports, denied access, humiliation disguised as policy. Marcus attended the opening of the New York office on a bright spring morning. He stood before a small crowd, not as a victim but as a witness. He said, "The question is not whether America can produce injustice. We know it can. The question is whether America can still produce enough courage to confront it." The crowd applauded. But Marcus was not finished. Do not wait until the person harmed is powerful before you care. Do not wait until a judge is bleeding before you ask what has been happening to ordinary people. Justice that only wakes up for the important is not justice. It is reputation management. That line became the title of editorials across that country. Justice that only wakes up for the important is not justice. 2 years later, Marcus walked through John F. Kennedy International Airport again. The terminal had changed. New signs, new supervisors, new complaint procedures, new federal monitors. Officers wore body cameras with automatic upload rules. The premium lane had a different layout. Rachel Adams was now a senior operations manager. When she saw Marcus, she walked over. "Justice Bennett." "Rachel." They shook hands. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said, "I still think about that morning. So do I. I wish I had stepped in sooner." Marcus looked at her kindly. "You stepped in when courage became necessary." She shook her head. "I froze first. Most people do." Rachel's eyes filled. "I am sorry." Marcus nodded. "I know." At that moment, a young black man in a college hoodie approached the premium lane. He looked nervous. Maybe he recognized Marcus. Maybe he simply felt the weight that many people feel in places where they are watched too closely. An officer at the podium asked for his identification. The young man's hands trembled as he searched his backpack. The officer waited. No shouting, no sarcasm, no hand on the belt. Rachel noticed Marcus watching. She said softly, "We train them differently now." Marcus looked at the young man. "Training matters." Then he looked back at Rachel. "But culture matters more." The young man found his identification. The officer scanned it. "You are all set, sir. Have a good flight." The young man exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for years. Marcus watched him walk through. "That is the sound reform should make," he said. Rachel looked confused. "What sound?" Marcus smiled faintly. "A person breathing easier." Several months after that, Marcus received a letter from federal prison. The envelope was plain. The handwriting was uneven. The return name was Eric Lawson. Michelle was visiting when the letter arrived. "You do not have to open it," she said. Marcus turned it over in his hands. "No, I do not." But he opened it. The letter was 3 pages. "Justice Bennett, I have written this letter many times and thrown it away many times because every version sounded like an excuse. I do not want to excuse what I did. When I first came here, I hated you. I told myself you ruined my life. I told myself I was made an example because you were powerful. I told myself I had done what any officer would do. Then one day in the prison library, an older inmate asked me one question. If he had been white, would you have stopped him? Sorry. I got angry. I was lying. That question followed me. It followed me into my cell. It followed me into sleep. It followed me when I watched the full video again during an appeal meeting. I saw myself see you. That is the only way I can explain it. I saw myself decide who you were before you spoke. I saw your credential in your hand. And I saw myself refuse to look because looking would have forced me to admit I was wrong. I saw the photograph of your wife fall on the floor. I heard you ask someone not to step on it. That moment hurt me in a way I did not expect because I realized you were not thinking about beating me or embarrassing me. You were thinking about someone you loved. And I was still treating you like an enemy. I was racist. I was cruel. I was proud. I used my badge to make people feel small because making them feel small made me feel powerful. I cannot undo what I did to you. I cannot undo what I did to the others. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But you said at sentencing that redemption begins where excuses end. I am trying to stop making excuses. Eric Lawson. Marcus read the letter once, then again. Michelle watched him closely. "What do you think?" Marcus folded the paper carefully. "I think truth has finally entered the room." "Is that enough?" "No, then what is it?" Marcus looked at the scarred corner of Elaine photograph on his desk. "A beginning." He wrote back 1 week later. "Officer Lawson, I received your letter. I believe you when you say you are beginning to see the truth. I also believe that seeing the truth is not the same as repairing harm. Remorse must become action. Action must become discipline. Discipline must become a different life. If you want to honor the people you harmed, tell the truth without asking to be praised for it. Admit what prejudice did to your mind. Admit what power did to your character. Admit how easy it was to become cruel when others rewarded your cruelty with silence. I cannot give you an easy forgiveness, but I can tell you this. No person is only the worst thing he has done if he becomes honest enough to spend the rest of his life confronting it. Do not waste your guilt. Turn it into witness. Marcus Bennett. He mailed the letter himself. No cameras, no announcement, no speech. Some acts of humanity are strongest when no one applauds them. Years later, when people asked Marcus Bennett what hurt the most about that morning at JFK, he never said the handcuffs. He never said the blood. He never said the pain in his shoulder. He said, "I remember my wife's picture on the floor." That answer stayed with people, because in that one small detail, everyone understood the truth. When Officer Eric Lawson pushed Marcus down, he was not only hurting a Supreme Court justice. He was stepping on a man's memories, his grief, his dignity, and everything sacred he carried quietly inside him. Months after the trial, Marcus received a letter from Lawson in federal prison. The letter was not long. Lawson wrote that for a long time, he had blamed everyone but himself. He blamed the media. He blamed the court. He blamed Marcus' title. He told himself he had only done his job. But one night, after watching the full airport footage again, he finally saw what everyone else had seen. Marcus had complied. Marcus had spoken calmly. Marcus had shown his credentials. And Lawson had refused to see him as a human being. He wrote, "I was wrong. I was racist. I used my badge to make people feel small because it made me feel powerful. I cannot undo what I did, but I finally understand that I did it." Marcus read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it beside the photograph of Elaine. He did not celebrate Lawson remorse. Remorse could not erase the bruise, the scar, the fear, or the years of pain suffered by others before him. But Marcus understood something important. A man who finally tells the truth about his wrong has taken the first step away from becoming worse. So Marcus wrote back. He did not offer easy forgiveness. He did not pretend the harm was small. He simply wrote, "If your remorse is real, turn it into a different life. Tell the truth without asking to be praised for it. Admit what hatred did to your heart. Admit what power did to your character. Do not waste your guilt." That was Marcus Bennett. He did not use his pain to destroy. He used it to reveal. He used it to build the Bennett Equal Justice Fund, with offices in New York, Washington, Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Houston. The fund helped ordinary people who had no title, no cameras, and no powerful name to protect them. Because Marcus knew the deepest lesson of his own story. Justice should not wake up only when the victim is important. A janitor deserves dignity. A teacher deserves dignity. A young father at an airport deserves dignity. A grandmother in a security line deserves dignity. A nervous student with shaking hands deserves dignity. And a black man in a suit should not need to be a Supreme Court justice before the world believes he belongs. The scar above Marcus' brow faded, but it never disappeared completely. He kept the bent photograph of Elaine in his briefcase for the rest of his life. Not because he wanted to remember the humiliation, but because he wanted to remember what survived it. Love survived, truth survived, dignity survived, and in the end, that was the victory. Officer Eric Lawson thought power meant making another man lower his head. Marcus Bennett proved that real power is keeping your soul upright when the world tries to push you down. The airport floor was cleaned. The broken glasses were taken away. The cameras stopped recording, but the truth did not disappear. It moved through courtrooms, through newsrooms, through police departments, through families, through every person who had ever been judged before being known. Excellent remained simple. Be careful with people. You do not know what they carry. You do not know who they love. You do not know what pain they are already surviving. And you do not know when the person you are trying to humiliate will become the mirror that forces you to see yourself. Marcus Bennett walked into JFK that morning, trying to catch a flight. He walked out carrying a wound that exposed a system, and because he refused to let hatred write the final line, that wound became a doorway for justice. Not perfect justice, not easy justice, but the kind of justice that begins when one person tells the truth and others finally stop looking away.